ways. So
education and entertainment purposes only. Always check with your primary care physician first. See, we just got that out of the way, Dr. Hill. It's just me and you right now. We're live.
So anyone else who follows after is covered by our disclaimer that this is
yes, absolutely edutainment. So we were talking in the green room, Dr. Hill. Schools right now, this is the time of year where people are like saying, hey, you know, what can we do to get from point A to point B in the classroom? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I'm seeing people identify, needs for the first time. They, the summer's over. It's been now 5-6 weeks into school, and the first report cards are coming in, and parents are getting, novel information, discovering their kid suddenly can't focus or hasn't been turning in homework. And there's a certain amount of like discovery of phenomena that the school is communicating back to the parent. And then you have this other phenomena where the kid has just been full court press doing all the stuff for the past 5 or 6 weeks, and it's starting to take a toll. Their sleep is getting dysregulated, and they're getting stressed, and they're like sport performance is crumbling, or they're being mean to their sibling. And this sort of mid-fall period seems to be a kind of a stressful one for adolescents, especially. I think we're given all those things building up, and we tend to get a little rush of kids in adolescents, especially, and also some college kids, although typically they're a different time of year. But yeah, they didn't get some support, and then hopefully move on.
Do the college kids reach out to you, or the parents?
They don't. The parents do eventually. The problem with college kids is they go off the rails harder, longer. Yeah. So we generally get college kids. The most common time to get college kids that are having trouble. So there's really 2 times. One is right before they come to college. The parents go, wait a minute. This is going to be hard. This is without the structure, without the reminders, without the systems we built to support your executive function or your stress, whatever it is, we're concerned. So they go and do some neurofeedback and to shore up those resources and send the kid to college a little better. And when I do work with those kids, I also spend a fair amount of time teaching them how things work in terms of like circadian rhythm and insulin and the basics of biohacking behaviorally, so they can do things like get away with staying up all night and studying, and then how to put the circadian rhythm back on track quickly, would not have a lot of consequence if they need to do stuff like that or want to party. Here's how you do it safely. So there's a certain amount of like helping educate, but we see them right before they leave for college, and then we tend to see them in the summer after their first year or second year, because what happens is things progressively crumble. Parents don't generally find out rapidly. Report cards aren't sent home by default in college. So if you want to look at something, or if you have access to the school system, you can perhaps, but it's a different relationship with the responsibility. So we tend to get kids getting further off the rails in college before they get help. So
what on the mental side of help, it's been a while since I've been to college. I don't know about you, Dr. Hill. Who reaches out? Is it the RA? Like, who notices that something is off? Like they get into trouble, or
it's a great question.
Or the way they act.
It's a great question. I would say that we see. I up until recently, up until 2019, I was teaching at the college level. So 5 years ago, but it wasn't that different culturally, I don't think, than it is now. And we would have kids. I was doing lecturing, education classes around neuroscience of aging and cognitive neuroscience classes and peak brain aging classes, a bunch of gerontology focused work. And so I was seeing these kids. I would say it also depends on the age group a lot, because for several years I was a teaching fellow in the Frontiers in Aging program at UCLA, which is one of the tracks that freshmen can do. They come in, and UCLA has this program for some freshmen. It's optional, but it's called the cohort program, where you don't just take a bunch of classes, but you actually stick with the same group of kids through multiple classes across the entire year, and the classes are thematically tied together. So I saw these, 17 and 18-year-olds come in and would work with them for a year as they move through, 3/4 of class and different projects and, different things. And you see a lot of development and a lot of variability. One 18-year-old to the next, not the same at all. Some are, not yet fully baked, and some are, conquering the world at 18. And then you get the people who are the mid to late undergrad, like the juniors, the sophomores, who are starting to get a little existential ennui and getting in trouble with, not lack of purpose, basically. So I would say, though, college students don't flame out educationally, academically, and even with mental health stuff the same way that younger kids can, I think. I don't know if there's more freedom to show your anxiety or your whatever, but I think college might be a filter too. Once you go over that hurdle of getting into it and putting all that effort in, and the screen that is there to sort of say, no, you can't come in, is going to catch a certain amount of people who are struggling with academic difficulty and tendencies for anxiety or ADHD. So, I think we may have a natural filter built into our college system to keep some of the people out in some ways, unfortunately, who have some significant needs in those executive areas.
Now, with the college kids, when did the Adderall, all these meth products come out that the kids started using them, and that has had an effect on them?
Yeah, it's been a long time now. I mean, when I was starting to teach at UCLA, it was 2005 or 6. And it was already by then, 20 years ago.
And then the internet happened. Now it's really easy to get the stuff.
Yeah, and not just stimulants, although that is relatively, there's a stimulant shortage, I hear. So,
Is there?
Yeah, maybe not in the US so much, but a lot of countries are having trouble. I have a business in the UK. We have a business in Europe, and there's this big sort of difficulty, especially in the UK, both getting diagnoses and getting medication. People get prescriptions for meds. But even in the US, I hear that in some regions where clients are like, yeah, I'm looking for neurofeedback because I can't get my Adderall. So I heard about this neurofeedback stuff. So ironically, we're getting market share in neurofeedback from the stimulant consumer because they can't get stimulants. So, and the same thing's happening with nootropics. And this, I think, is more concerning for college students and younger, is that there's lots of random nonsense out there on the internet you can purchase that isn't even as safe as stimulants, and that may create secondary problems. So, you get certain compounds on board that are research chemicals or that are off-label drugs overseas, and suddenly somebody's getting, massive side effects from what they thought was a study drug, essentially. So
Ben says they got to give those production line workers those stimulants and they'll roll them off.
That's right. So it's kind of like a self-reinforcing thing. Give the Adderall company at the Adderall, and then they make more Adderall. It's turtles all the way down. It's speed all the way down.
It's like looking in a mirror. Radar, speaking of Adderall, have you ever heard of using midodrine as a stimulant?
I've heard of midodrine. Is that it? No
idea.
Yeah, I forget what the mechanism or what the molecule is, but I've heard of it. Obviously, it's got to be like an ephedrine kind of compound with that drene at the end. But Radar, maybe you can.
Radar, help us out.
Yeah, what is it? Remind us what midodrine is. I'm too lazy to Google it.
Oh, here we go. Look at Radar coming through. Increases blood pressure to your head.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I think if it works for executive support, I'd rather do HEG, FNIRS, PBM, HBOT well before I'd rather push up with a chemical, push up blood pressure. That's just
Ben says it raises an interesting question on the turtles. Would psychiatrists necessarily prescribe the same medications if they tried them themselves?
No, because psychiatrists would probably, know that different people react differently to drugs. So their own experience wouldn't necessarily. Plus, there's this big prohibition against, getting high on your own supply if you're a psychiatrist. They call that diverting when you take meds that should go to somebody else.
Oh, like the addicts working in the hospital and kind of pocking a...
Yeah. I worked in hospitals, inpatient psychiatric units and things. And during the time when it went from just a random, cabinet that a nurse worked out of to a computerized cabinet where you had to give it a retinal scan and type in 3 codes and hop on 1 foot for 6 minutes before it opened up. And just because of the problems that existed in the industry, the mental health industry broadly, of diversion from especially stimulants. So, yeah.
Huh. Increases blood pressure to the head, but doesn't directly cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, interesting. So it's got to affect some of the neurotransmitters that affect alertness. Then things like acetylcholine and norepinephrine must be brought up a little bit indirectly through some sort of catecholamine phenomena. That's interesting. Again, sounds risky to me. So I'd rather do HEG or hyperbaric or something else. If it creates an effect, I'd rather create a regulatory effect in that direction versus just pushing in that direction. That's my preference.
I don't know if I need more blood pressure in my head.
Right, I know.
So Dr. Hill, when 80% of your business is putting in the box remote,
yeah.
What's the top 2 or 3 symptoms that you're trying to train, or what are the complaints that you're trying to eliminate?
Yeah, I will say that the things we work on have shifted over the past decade or two that we've been doing this work. It's really sort of spreading out. Like when I first did this work, working with Larry Hirschberg on the East Coast, it was a neurodevelopment program, autism and related phenomena, and neurodevelopmental, mostly kids. And even when I did work in private practice, I had a certain focus on autism, and I got some addiction work in because I partnered with some addiction folks. And had a lot of ADHD experience through the autism experience because you get similar populations and presentations sometimes. And then as I developed Peak Brain, I mean, we're coming up on 10 years. We're about 6 months away from 10 years at Peak Brain now. And we have a really wide range of people, and it really does still track the traditional, if you will, clinical population, parents with kids that have nonverbal autism and people with seizures and that kind of stuff, and classic phenomena like PTSD and OCD. But these days, over the past few years, we're getting an awful lot more people with just general broad complaints that are the kinds of things you would get in infirm and elderly people during periods of the US history when we didn't have good nutrition. Neuroinflammatory and malnutrition kind of phenomena create sort of signature. And we're seeing this neuroinflammatory signature in presenting populations across complaint. And it looks like dysautonomia for some people. It looks like POTS for some people. It looks like exercise intolerance. For some people, it's kind of a long COVID blame. But it seems like there's this change where we're in neurofeedback, we're moving away from just working on the classic regulatory into the some more physiological stuff seems to be showing up. So, yeah.
Well, radar comes through. Dr. Nemechek uses it for autistic kids because a lot of them can't handle stimulants like methylphenidate.
Interesting. I would love to see a brain map with and without mitocrine. What was it?
Who brought that up?
Radar.
There we go. Radar.
Mitodrine.
Mitodrine.
Not mitocrine. Yeah. Mitodrine.
Okay.
Do you know that drug?
No,
Anthony?
I'm looking it up now. Very interesting. Yeah, with Martin Muller, who I believe is a psychiatrist in one of the groups, was talking about mitochondria the other day, and he thinks they may be involved in neurofeedback side effects, and one way he tries to help people with that is by getting them to eat a not like ketogenic, but like a low blood sugar diet. So anyway, I don't know how far that road goes, but it's reminding me of it now when I'm looking at this.
Yeah, you can use light keto to create anti-inflammatory states too, right? Because ketones themselves are anti-inflammatory. They're used for cell repair.
Interesting.
repair. So, and they're used for fuel directly, but without oxidative smoke. They don't blow off a lot of byproduct when you burn them. So they tend to be very anti-inflammatory compared to glucose metabolism. My hunch is part of the stability mechanism we know in deep ketosis that's anti-seizure. I think light ketosis is broadly anti-inflammatory.
Nice. Okay.
Autistic kids have a lot of issues with dysautonomia. Somebody help. Cerebral
dysautonomia.
Yeah. Say that 3 times fast. Cerebral hypoperfusion, lightheadedness, etc.
Yeah.
Radar, you're earning your money today, man. You're worth every cent.
Every cent we pay you, and then some.
That's
This is why HEG works so well for autism sometimes. I mean, not every case. There's many things you put in that bucket called autism, but HEG, training blood flow, vascular dynamics to become more stable and less reactive, less droppy with stress and fatigue and things, creates real change in ASD populations in a way that's a little unique. It's a hard thing to get with any other tool in ASD. It's vascular dynamics that you're getting stability in. Do you guys use HEG of any flavor? Are you familiar with that tool set?
I have not, but I feel like I just saw Santiago say he likes to use it for, he might have said high beta. It was a recent thread I saw. Is there a reason you use HEG over another, Dr. Hill?
Yeah. It's an adjunctive tool, though. I don't generally use it by itself unless there's behavioral reasons. Like if a kid's really, I've used it with autistic kids that are screaming and stimming and won't sit still because it's insensitive to movement. It's a infrared. Do I have one here on the table? I might.
Nice. Okay.
It's an infrared light. Yeah, it's a camera. The one that I use is passive infrared, PIR. I don't seem to have one in reach. The other form is NIR, near infrared, which has an emitter and a receiver. That's Herschel Tumum's version. I use Jeff Carman's version, which is essentially just an infrared camera that's not focused, then it's pointing inward. So you get waves of heat coming off the brain as a proxy for metabolism. And lots of people use this differently. The way that Dr. Carman uses it is with sort of static threshold that you reset manually, kind of old school. What I found I really like using it as a very simple mechanism where I just yoke the real-time signal to stimulus, like an auditory rising and falling tone and a visual that tracks that. And literally just look at the real-time signal and do biofeedback, traditional biofeedback on it, where you're watching for a goal, you're effortful. And when you think effortful thoughts or happy thoughts, 2 seconds later, you get a blood surge. The bold response in an fMRI, for instance, is that sort of blood oxygen level dependent tissue response to cognition or effort. So you can sit there and stare at the screen and go, and then after a second it goes, zip. Oh, I made my brain, do a vascular pump, go me. And if you keep doing that, you get a change over time. And I use it for migraine. Always use if I have migraine presentations, because it's a vascular phenomena. I'm pretty sure neurovascular coupling and spreading cortical depression of the metabolism, etc. I use it for autism. I don't know why it works in autistic spectrum. I have a hard time understanding the effects we get and how they're happening. And I'll unpack that in a second if you want. And I use it for concussion and post-COVID kind of things, these broad metabolic neuroinflammatory phenomena. But in autism, HEG, the style that I use, PIR, passive infrared, it's always central. It's never moved, mostly because it's got a really broad range of focus. You don't need to get any focus. It's not doing a topical thing. It's getting the whole head pretty much. When we do that training, in most people, if you or I did it, it would feel a little focusing. For some people, it feels like you had too much coffee. It's a little bit boosting. In autistic spectrum people, often it gooses social function. It gooses the humor and sense of timing. If you're high functioning autistic and you have a little bit of a wooden, communication style, little timing's kind of awkward. And I had one client when I was working with Dr. Hirschberg who was in his 40s, and he was high functioning autistic, but not Aspie. He was autistic, and he had some very unusual social stuff, but he was obsessively interested in jokes. That was his thing, jokes. And so he would memorize huge numbers of jokes. And it wasn't just that he had to know the jokes and know the patterns. it was in the telling of them. He really, really enjoyed walking around Providence, Rhode Island, and finding random people, tell him a joke. And he would come in every few years and be like, I'm not funny right now. Can we do some more HEG? I need to be funny again. And he would literally get like snappier and a little more humorous, a little more sensitive. And I don't understand why, because most of those like social cueing, humor, timing things, I would put in the back of the head pretty far away from big vascular tone. And yet it produced this social sensitivity. His prosodies, verbal lilt, would go from sounding kind of wooden and a little like this to sounding a little bit more natural and a little bit more, you could, and that's back here. And the eye contact stuff, fusiform gyrus, that's back there. So you can get big effects from doing frontal lobe training, but I don't know why it works. It's one of those recipe book things that we come across in the field that, that works. Okay, remember that. But
all right, we got a line at the bar here. Dr. Hill, the benefit from the ketogenic diets might be from starving bacteria in the small intestine. Bacteria in small intestine produce LPS, which is insanely pro-inflammatory.
Interesting. I bet you could figure that out looking at the time course. Figure out the time course of improvements and seeing gut biome time course die off, because I think it's a different. I think there's a different time course in brain responses and gut responses. So I bet you distinguish them in a research experiment for your dissertation there, Radar.
Ben asks, can you see the opposite blood flow changes from EEG?
Sure. Yeah. If you had an infrared camera, you would see changes while people are training.
Radar asks, HEG made me feel very smart. Oh, I need some of that. And gave me good executive function, but I found it caused some weird issues.
Yep.
Made me sympathetic dominant, I think. Changed the way EEG neurofeedback affected me too.
Yep. Too much. You did too much, unfortunately. You can back that off. That's an over-arousal effect. Very common in HEG. When you overdid it, too much time, probably, if is my guess, per session. But what that will have done is left you a little anxious. It will, if you look at your QEG, your beta is going to be higher than it was before you did all that. And so you can, knowing your brain, you can go after it and kind of back out some of that activation tone. It should be pretty straightforward, Radar. So I would look at your own data and, I bet you can figure it out.
I think Ben went to the Pete Jansons School of Communication. I've heard of people having bad reactions, Otto, but I don't know if any more or less than anything else.
Of HEG? Yeah. HEG is contraindicated, in my experience, under strong anxiety. Like if you've got OCD or severe, trauma response stuff, it's not a good tool. Unless you're, in the middle of a burgeoning migraine and then whip it out. But you want to really avoid anyone who's prone to overactivation. It will overactivate you if you're prone to that. You have to be very careful.
Anthony, you want to read some of these off? You do the mixed drinks. I'll just do the drafts. I reckon autism is mostly rigidity. If you're central, can you perhaps be seeing more flow in the DMN?
Autism is mostly social processing. And the rigidity stuff comes from classic features that many people experience in anxiety who are not autistic, and it just looks different because it's blown all the way up. So I'm not sure what you mean by central. The DMN will get cramped up in the perseverative, the ruminative, the hyperfocused, and the OCD. So yeah, you do see DMN dysregulations in autism.
I was wondering, when you mentioned, Dr. Hill, that you were treating the front of the brain and it was helping the person with humor. I've heard that I think the ventromedial prefrontal cortex can be involved in empathy. I'm thinking mirror neurons. I don't know if you think that's involved. But.
I don't know what I think is a short answer. I really work hard to come right up to a conclusion and avoid it whenever possible. A near missing conclusion is great in my book. Cool. Just so I don't have to necessarily operate in a rigid way. But
speaking of rigidity,
right. But we know there's a big circuit that goes from that dorsolateral PFC all the way, especially the right. The right one, I think, it might be more relevant. I don't know if these are connected, but it makes some sense that the right DLPFC back to the back right area that goes through the the right precentral gyrus, C4. That's the supervisor circuit for executive function. And the particular connection between dorsolateral PFC and posterior. I think I saw an article floating around about the precuneus, right, which is posterior between the motor and the parietal there. That's going to do outside world kind of representation and threat because it's right hemisphere. So I think there's something to do with sort of that circuit has this sort of thing about avoidance and threat built into it, which is almost the exact opposite of humor. And we also get attachment issues from that right front corner of the brain too, right? So I start to see this weird phenomena when the right front's involved for some people. You can do these release protocols, which were the sort of first generation Sieber and Fisher, bring up theta at the right front kind of style thing, really early, kind of blunt instruments now. Steven doesn't do those now, but I use those early on. And I had some people who would wake up in the middle of the night giggling with laughter and full of love after doing that. Like what? And like empathy just bubbling over. And it's that sort of, this right front area, but it's how it's connected to the lifeguard ready to keep you safe or not. It seems to be a big piece of that, that threat piece. And I wonder if the same circuit's involved with the ability to put yourself in someone's shoes, be empathetic. And that, I think empathy and humor, we're going to share a lot of resources.
That's very cool. We have another question from Radar. Does B12 give people energy by increasing beta waves?
I don't know. I think it does. I think it increases.
You know what the B stands for?
What's the B stand for?
Beta.
Beta.
Oh, funny.
Slow news night.
Right. It increases cell metabolism, and so I mean that's where beta is. It's in that fast metabolism, moderate to low perfusion. So maybe. I think it's person by person too, right? Methylation, you get changes in the singulates, you get changes in the other DMN structures based on MTHFR, and then that will mean that different forms of B12 hit you differently. Methyl hydroxo, et cetera, all hit you differently. So, which B12? And is it an injection? Is it oral? So I don't know. It's a complicated question, Radar. Trick question.
Way to go, Radar. Thank you for showing up, by the way. Please check with your primary care physician first for entertainment and educational purposes only. The video editor has a question. What's the best bang for your buck? I don't want to say, because you hate it when you say, what protocol, but CZ, can you do the most with just CZ?
No. In fact, you can cause a lot of abreactions with CZ if you aren't careful. It's often very gentle and across most people, it's a relatively safe protocol. But there's a certain characteristic of brain that does not like CZ. Sebring talks about this as a likely place to create abreactions if there's a trauma history. And the way Sebring talks about it is, I believe, if you have to go after it for other reasons, then you can really be working on inhibiting a different range, almost into the delta range is one of her theories about how to go after dissolving that. But I find if you had to pick one protocol, your question, C4A1 SMR.
And what's going on there?
Well, it's SMR global. It's not as focused in the right hemisphere. SMR is training the corticothalamic and thalamocortical neurons. You're training the entire gain of the executive and the sleep systems at once. You're doing global work. You're bringing up plasticity to 11 for a day or two after every session. And so,
is that what you're saying? Somebody that when you send the box out?
Sorry?
You got the parents who their kids just got a crappy report card and they just got the box. Is it
from us?
Is that what they're going to ask for?
They're gonna we'll do a brain map, so that we do remote brain mapping. Somebody's gonna walk them through putting a cap on their kid's head and squirt it full of gel, and no, next hole over. Oh, there you go. Watching impedances, watching quality, and then after we look at the data, we always compare brain mapping with CPT. We never do one or the other. It's always both if the kid's old enough to do a performance test. Because I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. I don't believe in data alone. I don't believe in performance alone. You got to put those things, the physiology and the performance, in contrast. So once we look at the data, I will say to the parent something like, here's some unusual features that often mean X, Y, or Z. Are they important? Are they real? Are they meaningful? parent and often the kid will select what to work on. All that takes a few days, and then peak brain coaches spend a couple of weeks teaching you and gradually practicing doing it with you. And we generally do start with SMR training for a lot of people, and we generally do start at C4 for a lot of people, but we make changes to how we start it based on age and anxiety and brain injury and all kinds of modifying factors that might mean, SMR has this magical property of working for a lot of things because it helps inhibitory tone. It teaches the brain how to pump the brakes on anxiety, on seizure, on distractibility, on sleep, on all kinds of things. So a little better inhibitory tone works wonders. And SMR, when it lands poorly, doesn't land that poorly. So one of my clinical strategies is to start in an SMR scape for most people, unless there's a good reason not to. And then over the 2 or 3, as you guys know, and anyone who's watching later will discover, neurofeedback, classic neurofeedback, you don't usually feel the first session. You usually feel it around 3-4 sessions in, is my perspective. So you have a little bit of time to let's work in the practice of it. Let's see how it feels to set some wires up. And let's use a safe middle of the road protocol that works for lots of things if we get lucky. That's not likely to cause any ab reactions. And then we're watching for that initial effect. And SMR creates initial effects around executive function and sleep. And I do move into CZ, as you mentioned, Pete. It's a good one. For many people, I'm moving doing C4 and CZs. But then I'm actually, by that point, after a couple of sessions, I'm designing off of their goals and their CPT and their brain maps at that point. So I'm branching out. So.
Do all calming protocols work by stimulating the vagus nerve?
No. Most, I would say mostly the vagus nerve will get calmed by the brain top down. If you're doing brain training protocols and it's calming you and there's a vagus response, then you're training something in the DMN, usually the cingulates. But there's literature showing you can get an HRV change from SMR training, and you can get SMR changes from HRV training. So, what happens in the vagus doesn't stay in the vagus. You guys have to give me credit when that shows up on a t-shirt.
That's
somewhere.
Pretty damn good.
I like that one. I've been using that on podcasts for decades. Yeah.
I just saw a little blip in traffic coming in. Dr. Hill, what is the your left eyeball right below the eyebrow towards the nose? What is that spot there that some people train? It's like the 911 center. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So on the right side, FPO2.
Is that what it is?
Frontopolar orbital. So FPO is frontopolar orbital bone, the socket.
When you want to chill somebody out, is that what it is?
No. I mean, that's one of Seaburn Fisher's old, really significant attachment trauma release protocols. But she warned in that paper on her website, she warned people not to do it for more than 3 to 5 minutes. Yeah, FPO2, Ben, exactly. And she sort of says, be really cautious with this one. And Seaburn's protocols evolved away from that because it was like dumping dynamite in a kiddie pool full of crap for some people. It was everything, the blowing crap up everywhere. But that is the attachment protocol essentially. And then she moved up to the FP2, just above the eye on the top of the arch. So for anyone who's ever wondering how to find FP2, often we're taught to do it in line with the eyeball, the pupil looking straight ahead. But I want you guys to, I want people to think about the arch of the bone right there. The middle of the arch is where FPO is. And so it's not, FP is. It's not, over there. It's not over there. It's right in the middle of the arch above the pupil. Yeah, there's a guide to it, exactly. And Ben on Seaburn's website. And she warns people against doing very much of it because it's so powerful. FPO2 can trigger seizures. Anytime you're rewarding below 4 hertz, you can trigger seizures if someone has a tendency for them. You don't usually. It's very hard to trigger seizures if you aren't already prone to seizures.
The only reason I know that one, number one, it makes me sound smart. And number two, my sister did it. She's a smart one in the family, the neuropsychologist, so she did it. And That like knocked her out for a half a day. She was had a great nap.
I think the FPO2 might have been the one that my colleague woke up all night in the middle of the night laughing and giggling, thinking how wonderful the world was, like it was a release protocol. But I've also seen FPO2. I have another couple ones that I use in the same category. They're very rare in that they can feel very crappy afterwards. You know, there's an alpha down protocol that Ruth Lanius has, that Seaburn has, that I've developed a version of. It's a little bit different. They all kind of feel the same, and they feel lousy after you finish them. Generally, you're like, and when I was developing my version of it, I was working with a couple colleagues that I mentor, and I was starting to use these protocols a little bit gently, carefully, mostly with staff who wanted to try them, because I'm not a therapist. I don't love to do random experimental things that, you know, might be a little pushy without being very careful. But a lot of my supervisees, mentees at the time were psychologists and MDs. And I'm like, oh, hey, here's the thing I'm working on. Because they're asking, I need something for this, for attachment trauma, for developmental trauma, for whatever. Oh, okay, I think this might work. This is my new thing. I haven't tested it well. Oh, okay, we'll try it. And without fail, a dozen people across 2 or 3 providers and my staff who wanted to try the protocol gave the same report, which was like one of my mentees called me and he's, oh my gosh, I got this really nasty voicemail from my client. They left my office. They left me a 10-minute rant about how they do not want to do that protocol again. And it really sucks. And they really hate me. Wow. And someone else got an email saying the same thing. I did not like that protocol. And then they all came back 2 days later and said, hey, can I have some more of that protocol?
Well, when people say it's all placebo and all that, just whip that one out on them.
Right.
I mean, it does have an effect. I mean, it's a lot of trial and error, isn't it? You're trying to find, you know, what's right for everybody, and it's not a one and done, right?
It's not. And I think Radar just said that one of his friends would develop seizures after FPO2. If he's having seizures that didn't just happen once, it's got to be an underlying phenomena that get irritated into like being more visible. That just means probably it's probably a theta reward someone did or a delta reward, and they brought the spike up and they dropped the SMR, because theta and SMR are a little bit mutually antagonistic. So if you bring up theta strongly, you can really erode SMR quality. So you can get control over that again. Radar, your friend just has to probably target. If the neurofeedback created it by bringing up theta, then you can shut down that theta and bring up SMR again and just reverse it, I would guess. So tell your friend to.
Grace, thanks for gracing us with your presence. How do you deal with high beta?
Tell to chill out. I don't know.
Have a latte.
That's right.
Raider, he definitely had an underlying that was exposed because he has other weird issues.
Oh,
that's a lot like Geschwin syndrome. What's Geschwin syndrome?
It's Geschwin's area. Unless someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Geschwin's area is the right-hand side analog to Wernicke's area, right? In fact, often Wernicke Geschwin is the left one, anyways. But they were friends. But I think the Geschwin syndrome is a failure of the right analog. What that produces is difficulty doing things like rapid sequencing. You can't like turn your hand over rapidly. It's got some cerebellar stuff. I think there's some things involved with, is it language? I forget what's in Geschwin's. I'm a bad cognitive neuroscientist today. But it's got some motor things. It's got some perceptual environmental things. A non-language, it's like a non-language Wernicke's analog in some ways. For other things, other sequences.
Anthony, what's been going on in the chat room? Give me something, man.
Yeah, mainly actually just chatting with John and Jay. Well, there was more Ozempic stuff. That's been the hot. Every so often I'll get people texting me about Jay's. You guys did a podcast on digital Ozempic. And I think I wanted to make sure that I knew. I should probably go talk to that person. I hope what was getting across is the digital Ozempic, as we termed it, it's not really trying to get you to per se lose weight. It's more trying to give you impulse control. So that might be something, I think. So that might be something that needs to be cleared up for people, because I get that one a lot.
I have a version I call the snackers protocol. It just removes the urge to like snack and, because you're bored and put sugar in your mouth. Doesn't really like make you lose weight. It just makes you not be quite as snacky and impulsive, basically.
Yeah.
So
now I'll throw a curveball at you. I did know there's a couple of female friends I have that they are, and this is just a stab in the dark, but they're not losing weight, and they are doing neurofeedback. It's not really helping in that regard. And one of the things I noticed is something clicked. Somebody told me that SMR can increase slow waves, and don't know if that's true, but I checked with both these people.
Like theta
do a lot of SMR, frontal slow waves. And so I looked it up, and slow waves might be associated with less brain metabolism. So I'm wondering, could that
be
but
you're talking about like global excesses of delta at a high level is what that's sort of hyperperfusion with blood and reduced metabolism as a consequence. That's a delta phenomena, right? So
okay.
What I have found in a few of my clients though is, and in me,
okay,
training SMR makes me hungry.
Huh.
So I think there's I think we may be getting people like going home and eating after their neurofeedback.
Interesting.
Because I get like, oh, I worked out, I got to eat sometimes. Not every protocol, but like if I hit beta hard, the kind of beta where you're like nodding while training and you can't keep your eyes open because you overdid it. Like an hour later, I'm like, oh, I got to eat.
It sounds like digital marijuana.
Well, that's out. There's things you can do. Alpha theta might be close. I don't know.
Yeah.
For some people it is. We'll have to see if one of our friends for the live stream shows up, has been doing a lot of meditation and alpha theta, and he's getting really trippy experiences.
Well, we do have a follow-up with that.
We got a line at the bar.
This is from DJ. He says, could the Snackers protocol help with restlessness and meditation?
The Snackers protocol targets the right insula.
Okay.
So, which is about body awareness.
What is the Snackers Pro? We should probably get out.
Yeah, I shouldn't. I really don't like to give specific protocols, but I'll just say that it's FP1 minus M2.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah,
that's okay. No. I don't want to like start naming numbers because people think it's a fixed thing and they go and try one thing when it could be the wrong thing for your brain without looking at your brain first. So I'm happy to talk about protocols. That's my personal limit is regions. I'll talk regions.
No problem.
But it's like FP1 minus M2, basically, and you can find it. You can find old versions of it all over the place, so people can dig.
Yeah.
But it's very, hey VJ, it's very one of those strange protocols. Most things in neurofeedback you do, and they create change, and they create progressive change. You do them more, you get more change. But the Snackers protocol is transient. You get a blunting of effect, a blunting of desire to snack.
Did you say
VJ,
blunting?
have you tried the Snackers protocol? Or are you talking about meditation? This giant yes in the screen we have here.
He says, I think he's just I don't know why maybe he can tell us. VJ, is there any reason why you're asking about meditation and the Snackers protocol together? So
he's thinking about a
impulse control or something.
Yeah. I don't know if I like the Snackers protocol for you, VJ, unless you're snacking. I don't like to do protocols randomly unless there's like some rationale, because we're never perfect. And so I like to have some reason, some idea I can test as I try something, because at least then we've colored a little bit out into a dark corner, and now the light's shown there. And by doing enough of that, I can get a lot closer to through lines that don't take as much experimentation.
When I did tag zinc at FC and PZ, it increases theta and alpha in the frontal lobe. I started binging like crazy after that. Also gave me a wicked temper.
Yeah, you should be doing FZ. You shouldn't tag zinc at FZ. Oh.
Made me blink a lot and burp a lot.
Yeah, you developed a tick. Of course you did. A theta should not be brought up at the midline, front midline. That's not the smart thing to do for most people. Yeah, you got disinhibited, made you blink a lot. You probably have a squint tick radar, like one of these things. Those are really common with high theta.
I'm being held hostage.
Yeah, blink 3 times. Yeah, exactly, Radar. The transience of the Snackers protocol means that it lasts for a few hours. The next day, you don't have any lasting effect. And that's weird in neurofeedback to create a somewhat reliable transient effect. Most things don't do that. Most things are either state shifters that kind of wear off over time, or they're trait shifters that create change. And there's kind of nothing in between.
Interesting.
Damn, Radar, you totaled your car because of it.
Whoa.
Yeah. Yeah. Bringing up theta too much can do that. Alpha theta can do that for some folks. I know people who have clients who've driven through like the parking garage after alpha theta, just got in the car and like hit the gas and like boom into the wall because they were just out of it. And I warn people not to like, operate heavy machinery for 20 minutes. See how you feel afterwards. Alpha theta is really powerful stuff. It's ridiculously powerful protocol for state shifts.
And that's just audible, right?
Yeah, it's audio only. Well, there's different ways you can do alpha theta. It works visual as well, but traditional alpha theta is eyes closed, lying back. The generators of alpha are much stronger in the visual tissue with the eyes closed. That helps a lot with creating the state.
Radar, I hear you, man. You were following the instruction of your practitioner. It wasn't any of us, because this show is for information and educational purposes only. Please check with your primary.
And honestly, anyone who's using tag sync is not really a provider. Sorry, I'm just going to be inflammatory.
You're just saying.
Tag sync's nonsense. It's one of these biohacker derived protocols. It doesn't have a lot of basis in reality. For those who don't know, tag sync, theta, alpha, gamma sync. But it uses hardware and designs and things like BioExplore and BioEra that can't measure gamma. So all you're really doing is a poor man's alpha theta. So you're doing alpha theta at FZ and PZ by doing tag sync at FC and PZ. So you're potentially creating an abreaction of disinhibited high front midline theta. And there's all kinds of weird, quirky stuff that happens when we get high front midline theta. So
gamma can't be measured.
Not reliably. I know there's disagreements in the field, but I think you need like stupid expensive equipment to really get above 40 hertz. 40 hertz is sort of annoying and you can't really measure.
Is there a $1 per hertz number? Like, does it have to be 20 grand?
No, it has to be ultra low impedance active electrodes, basically. And those things in our industry cost $1,000 or $2,000 each when done properly. Wow. And so you get a 64 channel cap in your EEG systems, like I did gamma work with a 64 channel biosemi cap, active electrodes. My PhD work, I did neurofeedback at C3 and C4, betas and SMRs or sham with a 64 channel active cap on top of it. The reason you use active electrodes is because you get a DC coupled signal. It goes all the way down to quote unquote 0. And it lets you do different things, SCP measurements. I was looking at ERPs. I didn't need DC coupled, but I wanted to look at where do spatial decomposition of the ERP. You can do some things. You can test networks of ERPs moving. I ended up finding really the effect in what's called ERSP, or event-related spectral perturbation, a burst of spectral EEG in response to the neurofeedback beep that was creating the ERP basically that I measured. But that system that we purchased for the lab was 80 grand plus some service contracts at the time. And it's a lot more now. That same system is well over 100 grand. So you don't need a 64 channel active electrode system to measure everything. But even if you went for like a 32 channel system with active electrodes and sintered silver chlorides, which isn't quite as sensitive, you're still talking like 30, 40 grand in our field these days.
Wow.
So it just becomes prohibitive to do real gamma work is my take on it.
Can I spitball out there? Video editor has a question. We have the sensors that go on the head. Do you think we'll get to the point where we can use lasers to measure what's going on, that we never even have to touch the head to pick up the energy that's coming off?
There are papers that show designs and tested in the physics labs designs of non-contact electrodes. They're called ultra high impedance electrodes or insulated electrodes. What they are is they're rings of concentric material that are insulated and can sit 1 centimeter or a bit more away from the scalp. And the brain's EEG is creating a signal differential within the ring electrode. And it's an amplified electrode. So you're picking up the perturbations essentially under that. And so you can imagine a baseball cap you just put on and your EEG is running. The big problem there, the reason it hasn't happened yet, isn't really one of technical engineering. It's that we have 100 years this year, 100 years of EEG. And when you do EEG, you have to compare the filters, the reference, the acquisition characteristics, the processing characteristics, the same as every other EEG you're comparing it to understand what you're looking at. You can't look at an ERP compared to spectral waves, compared to evoked information. It's all, references, montages, number of channels. It all changes what it looks like on the far side. So if we reinvented the electrodes, we would have no QEEG databases. We would have no sense of how to look at those at spikes in automatic detection. We wouldn't necessarily know how to sleep stage looking at the changes, because it wouldn't pick up the same thing. This is why MEG isn't everywhere. MEG is far superior for resolution than EEG. It's the other dipole, right? EEG is picking up the dipoles that are perpendicular to the scalp, and MEG is the other ones that are perpendicular to that. And it's great resolution, a little more expensive, but it doesn't match, at that point, 60 years of history of literature. So it never caught on, because you can't.
But wouldn't that be the true definition of a dry sensor? Because technically you could have an infinite number of data points with the light going to the head, picking this stuff up. It would, worrying about what
does electricity perturb light? I don't know if it does.
If you didn't know light, what would you do to pick up the energy?
You'd have to have an interference pattern. Like the electricity itself has to create interference in something that is measured. Maybe light does. My concern about that is it'd be an active measurement. It'd be causing change by shining enough laser on the head to interact with its EEG. You're going to get EEG changes. But the non-contact electrolyte that I described does exist. There's a group in Cambridge in the UK at one of the universities that developed a cardiac version of this. It's a ball. It's literally like a ball that you pick up and hold in your hand, and you go and you sit in a chair, like one of those 60s, swoopy chairs with the thing on top, and the chair and the ball give the computer a sense of where to look, and it images your EKG in real time in 3D, no contact and no touch. Really, really cool. Now it's kind of expensive, really cool stuff. But, we don't really know how to use the information. So getting more EEG or easier EEG, dry electrodes, you mentioned those. I was talking to someone today who's newish in the field, and he's like, "Oh, what about those $35,000 dry systems?" I'm like, "No, stay away. Bad idea." And the reason is, again, the field of EEG is built on 100 years of looking at signals in a certain way. Dry caps, most of them have Faraday cages around every electrode. So you lose all of the intra-electrode mixing, which we rely on for interpreting the EEG. And the dry electrode ones do really bizarre things below 4 hertz and blow it up so high you can't use it. So you can't get low thetas and deltas, and you can't look at coherence and phase. Suddenly, is that worth losing all that, precision and specificity? Is that worth not having your hair gelled up for 10 minutes? Really? I don't know. I'm very biased because I bought two $24,000 dry systems when they first became a thing, and I returned one within the window and didn't return the other one, and always wish that I had. So if anyone wants to buy a 24 channel dry system, I have one you can buy for a few grand.
We need a really good neurofeedback equipment pawn shop.
We need a really good neurofeedback equipment manufacturer and vendor and supply chain. We just don't have a lot of it's all super, super niche-y, or it's super low quality, and nothing in between. So.
All right, here's Ben helping me out. I think charge could control light, but there's very little charge compared to voltages needing less direct location of electrons. You want to look at the field around it, probably. And then, of course, VJ throws in, "Oh, no." Last call, everybody. Last call for alcohol.
You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
You don't have to go home. You can't stay here. Come on, Anthony. You got that group going. Give me something juicy, or is it just all politics? People pounding their steering wheels.
No. So there's some new drugs that were announced. There's a glaucoma drug for dementia that has really promising data right now or early on. There's a cancer drug that dementia patients, when they took it, they fall 70% less. So that just came out today, actually. But yeah, there is a lot of AI stuff and strange stuff happening. I don't know. They're using it to find new materials. That was one interesting thing, that since AI came out, there's all sorts of new materials being discovered and patents being filed. It's like one of the first studies on the effect of AI on science and innovation. So that's cool.
We've seen these containers, like, shipping containers that are full of robot biochem labs now, and they're completely self-contained. They have reagents, they have organic chemistry stuff, they've got little machines, and you just feed in like here's a question we're wondering about, and it goes and designs the experiment, does the experiment, iterates through multiple experiments. And there's been a bunch of small molecules found for, targeting cancers and things using that mechanism. Complete novel science. So being done for us at this point.
I'm really curious. Do you happen to know the name or anything like that? I can probably.
I don't. I can probably dig it up though. I'll find it.
Hey, Jay's not here, so we'll ask this one.
Yeah.
We will use Neuralink to do neurofeedback in the future.
It would no longer be neurofeedback at that point, Besides, Neuralink has some functional basic problems with how, what Elon Musk did was he solved the problem of cutting holes in heads. He did not solve the problem of doing BCI with implanted electrodes. He solved the problem of implanting. But there are a lot of problems with putting electrodes against the tissue and expecting the signals that are under those electrodes to remain at all constant and expect the brain not to learn and move. So while it is an advancement, he really advanced robotic surgery at a low level. That's the advancement. And, his company, Neuralink, has gotten in so much trouble for the way they've been doing brain research and animal research. So, I think we'll look back at this 10, 15, 20 years from now as like that one time they cloned Dolly the sheep 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, we could do it. Kind of. Okay. Let's learn more about genetics now.
But a serious note, those robots that are coming out at what, 30 grand, whatever the number is. I mean, to watch a YouTube video and to put electrodes on the head, that could be the new tech.
Could be. I mean, I think, in a few years we'll have, the next step, my prediction is the next step we're going to have is our AIs, our chat GPTs, our sonnets, or whatever, that are almost good enough to be agentic, to be like task driven and have knowledge bases on board. They're just about good enough now to start doing that. Those agentic level mission driven AIs are going to start living inside of autonomous shells shortly. So your robot will come home and plug itself in and then go out and do your shopping for you, or you're cleaning, or you're like, we have moved into Asimov's vision of the 60s now, finally, which is.
Talk to my wife. Have you tried passive dry? Last one from Ben. Have you tried passive dry, Andy? I don't know what passive dry is.
Oh, I assume, yeah. I've done passive dry. Passive electrodes that are dry. Yes. Not for years. Like 20 years ago, there was a passive dry forehead sensor, and it was the foreheads that was noisy for other reasons. But I don't know what the level of tech is right now with passive dry. Again, my big issue with dry is the Faraday cage around every electrode. So passive dry would have to essentially work almost like a wet electrode. Like, I think saline is the answer. If you don't like goop in your hair, I think saline's passable potentially. It has other management issues, but I think that's the solution. If you don't like goop and gel, figure out saline, because that's probably easy to deal with, and creates the same EEG you would get with sticky paste.
Dr. Hill, where do we send all of our users to check you out and learn a little bit more?
Oh yes, come to peakbraininstitute.com if you want to learn about neurofeedback. Come to one of our offices for brain maps, or go to YouTube and look for Dr. Hill, DrHill. And I do a weekly live stream and do some neurofeedback and hanging out.
When is that live stream?
Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific or 8 p.m. Central, and about an hour. And I've got about a month's worth of those, 20, 30 of those lining up now for historical ones. So if you're curious about how to biohack your sleep, your ADHD, your stress, while I do talk about neurofeedback in those live streams, I talk about lots of non-neurofeedback interventions that you might be interested in. So for folks that like this sort of stuff, go check that out.
Anthony Ramos, you got a pretty big tech group there. Can you just tell everybody where it's at?
Yeah, it's called Science and Technology Discoveries. At one point, we were almost one of the bigger science groups on Facebook. But yeah, and just there's a lot of good groups on Reddit and in Facebook for neurofeedback, and there's some really cool people.
Like yours, you got over 10,000. Quit being so humble.
Yeah. So,
but
it's allowed me to meet people like you guys. So there you go.
All right. Hey, everybody that chimed in, Ben, VJ, Grace, Radar, thank you for stopping by the bar, having a drink and, comparing notes. Of course, after this show, you're going to go check with your primary care physician first, because this is for entertainment, informational purposes only. Everybody, please have a great night, and I bid you a fondue.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right, bye all.
Good night, guys.
Have a good evening.